Well, before we jump into the sermon, I want to just take a moment to acknowledge and to thank those of you who have lost a loved one in the line of duty. We, as a church, and I personally, as an American, thank you for the sacrifice that you made, and we obviously want to acknowledge the sacrifice that they made. The David of the Bible, a man who was all too familiar with pain and with war, wrote in Psalm 34, verse 18, that the Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit. And so on Memorial Day, we remember and we honor those who were willing to sacrifice their lives for the sake of those that they loved. It's as Jesus said in John 15:13, greater love has no one than this, that someone lay down his life for his friends. So this morning we are continuing in Luke chapter 10, and if you've been with us the last couple weeks, you'll remember that we began 2 weeks ago in Luke chapter 9. Last week we talked from Luke chapter 10 about the parable of the Good Samaritan. And this morning we're going to be finishing up Luke chapter 10 by joining Mary, Martha, the disciples, and Jesus in the home of Martha and Mary. So that is Luke chapter 10, verses 38 through 42. If you have a Bible, there's a Bible in the pew in front of you, or you can open your phone and use the Bible app to follow along with us. So Luke chapter 10, verses 38 through 42. This is the story of two sisters, Mary and Martha, but these two sisters have different priorities. And as Jesus does frequently, he uses everyday experiences to teach an eternal truth for Mary, for Martha, for the disciples, and for us. And that truth is that Jesus cares. And that's what I want to talk to you about. Jesus cares. See, there's three questions that Jesus answers in these few verses that we're going to be able to pull this truth that Jesus cares from. And although it's only, you can count the verses on your hand, it's a very short story. And yet there's some timeless truths that will encourage us and that will challenge us. And all these questions begin with, does he care about? And then you fill in the blank. So does Jesus care about? And so the first question is, does he care about us? Like, does Jesus care about you and me? Does he care about Mary and Martha? Does he care about the disciples? Does he care about us, about who we are? Let's look at verses 38 through 39. As Jesus and his disciples were on their way, he came to a village where a woman named Martha opened her home to him. And she had a sister called Mary who sat at the Lord's feet listening to what he said. I don't know if you've heard a sermon preached on this passage or if you've read it yourself, but it seems to me that typically the spotlight is on Martha because Martha's having a dialogue with Jesus. I mean, it makes sense. The disciples don't say a word in this story. Mary doesn't say a word in this story. And so, it's, Martha's home. She's doing all these things. Jesus, says, hey, you're worried about all this stuff. Like, don't worry. Like, look at what Mary's doing. But I think the spotlight really is on Mary. It's not on Martha. The reason is because the first couple verses, we enter the home and we see Mary sitting at the Lord's feet. And so right from the get-go, Mary is acknowledged as the person who is sitting close to Jesus. And it would seem, first impressions, that she's doing the right thing. Like, she's listening to Jesus teach. Like, of course, that's a good thing. And then the middle part is Jesus talking with Martha when Martha comes to Jesus. And then the last part is Jesus praising Mary for having chosen what is better. And so you have Mary being praised on either end of this dialogue with Martha, meaning that Martha is in the spotlight of the story. Think about the dark night sky. And when you go outside, let's assume it's not a cloudy evening, of course. You go outside, dark night sky, what is it that your eye is drawn to? It's the moon or the stars, right? It's like what is shining. But you want to be able to see what is shining if the background would not be dark. And so in the same way, Martha is the backdrop against which we see Mary shining. We see what Mary is doing as praiseworthy and something we ought to imitate. Does that make sense? Okay. So Mary and Martha are sisters, and they're not only the two of them, but they also have a brother named Lazarus. And he's not in this story, but if you'll remember John, when Jesus raises Lazarus from the dead, that's their brother. And they grew up in this town of Bethany, which is just outside of Jerusalem. So in the previous chapters, Jesus and the disciples were up here, and Jesus decided to set out towards Jerusalem, which was south. Okay? So the direct route would have been going straight down through this village, a Samaritan village. But remember when the disciples went ahead and they asked, hey, like, would you welcome us? And the Samaritans were like, no, you can't come through here. That forced Jesus and his disciples to make a detour and come in from the east to Jerusalem. And so now they're in this home of Mary and Martha in Bethany only because they were forced to take a different route. If we didn't have Luke chapter 9, verse 51, when they went to the Samaritan village, and they hadn't said no, then we would not have had this encounter that Jesus had with Martha and Mary. So just practically, right, if you feel like you're wanting to get from point A to point B as quick as possible, and Jesus says take a detour, or there's a roadblock in your way, don't underestimate where he may be leading you, or he may be leading you by, that he wants you to talk with. Did any of you watch the PGA Championship this past week? Like, raise your hand if you watched the PGA Championship. Okay, I didn't either, so don't worry. But I did watch the highlights of Phil Mickelson winning. Do you guys know who Phil Mickelson is? Okay, American golfer. He's been around for a while. He's that golfer that people look up to. He was the guy that people looked up to, but they didn't really think he would win. Like, he had sort of he had his time and his moment in the spotlight, and now he's out of it. He's, nearing maybe retirement. And yet, he's on the 18th hole with a 2-stroke lead. He's about to win the PGA Championship. And as he walked to the 18th hole, people were so excited, anticipating that he was going to win, that they were crowding around him to the point where he had this security team of 6 guys around who were literally forcing their way and parting the crowd, like Moses parted the Red Sea. I mean, there's this aerial shot, and it's just here they are moving, and it's just opening up. People wanted to get near to him. And it makes sense because these are probably golfers who have watched Phil Mickelson, have looked up to him, have wanted to imitate his golf swing. And now they have this chance to get close to him right as he's about to enter the focal point, the highest point of his career. And in the same way, Mary wanted to get close to Jesus. I mean, she'd probably heard about Jesus. She'd probably listened to him teach from a distance. And now Jesus is in her home, sitting in her living room. Why wouldn't she want to get close to him? But I bet if Jesus had a security team, they wouldn't have let Mary get that close. Here's what I mean. In the first century, disciples were men, only men. The idea of a woman being a disciple, sitting at the feet of a teacher or of a rabbi, was unthinkable because women and men didn't have the same role in society. Women more often had the role that what Martha demonstrated, the person who was showing hospitality to the guest, who was preparing the food, who was making them comfortable so that the disciples could sit and they could listen to Jesus teaching. Women weren't permitted to sit there at the feet of the rabbi. And so I'm sure the disciples, even though they don't say any word, are grumbling in their hearts. They're thinking, why would Jesus let her sit so close to him? I mean, think about the last chapters. They were arguing about who was the greatest. They were jealous that someone else was able to do a miracle like what they did. And so now a woman comes and sits at the feet of Jesus. I bet the disciples were a little jealous, a little protective, a little angry or grumbling because Jesus wasn't creating distance between he and Mary. And so I wonder if this story and the truth that about Jesus caring about who we are was meant less for Mary and less for Martha and more for the disciples. Mary is sitting at the feet of Jesus, and Jesus doesn't push her away. He welcomes her. He teaches her just like he teaches everyone else. And what he is saying to the disciples, without flat out saying it, is, I care about her as much as I care about you. Just because you're one of the 12 doesn't mean you're anything special. It's just like what we learned 2 weeks ago when Jesus sent out the 72, right? He calls all of us to go and to make disciples. And sure, the 12 were the initial followers, but it doesn't stop at 12. Like Jesus' followers, there is no cap. There is no maximum for who can follow Jesus. And Jesus welcomes all people because he cares about all of us. And Jesus cares about Mary. He doesn't show favoritism to the men. He doesn't show favoritism to the politically powerful or to the healthy or to the strong. Perhaps the greatest indication that Jesus cares about each one of us is that he doesn't push us away when we seek to draw near to him, when we want to get close to him, to hear him, to know him. He welcomes us to sit at his feet, which is a position of honor, not just sit at a distance. He wants us to talk to him. So Jesus cares about Mary, and he cares about you. He cares about all of us. So the second question that Jesus answers is, does he care about what we do? Okay, so not just does he care about who we are, but does he care about what we do? Let's look at verses 40 and 41. But Martha was distracted. So remember the contrast between Martha and Mary. Martha's the backdrop. So in contrast to Mary, but Martha was distracted. Mary was focused. Martha was distracted by all the preparations that had to be made. There was an expectation that she was supposed to make things comfortable, show hospitality. She came to Jesus and asked, Lord, don't you care that my sister has left me to do the work by myself? Like, don't you care about what I do? Tell her to help me. And Jesus looks at her and he answers, Martha, Martha, you're worried and upset about many things. Let's pause right there. So Jewish travelers would depend on the hospitality of other Jews. Okay? So when Jesus and the disciples come to this home, Mary and Martha, they're also Jews. The expectation is they are supposed to serve them, to feed them, to welcome them. In fact, it would have been an insult to Jesus and to the disciples if Martha hadn't been trying to make her home welcoming. Like, it would have been an insult. Like, oh, you don't deserve, my sacrifice. Or you're not worthy of this per se. So Martha's service was not without value. Like that I want us to understand that her service, her work is praiseworthy. It's not that what she's doing is wrong, because we are supposed to work and to serve and to show hospitality and to sacrifice, right? We're supposed to be generous towards others, especially towards those who are guests. What she was doing, though, caused her to worry. She was working without joy. See, Martha is working because she is worried, whereas Mary is listening to the feet of Jesus, or listening at the feet of Jesus, not working because it brings her joy. Perhaps Martha is worried about what people are going to say about her. Like, she doesn't want to be the lady in Bethany who had travelers come and stay with her, and she was unable to meet their needs. Maybe she was worried that her sister Mary was going to insult Jesus and, cause a bunch of gossip in the town about, oh, did you hear what Mary did? Yeah, Martha should have stepped in and maybe prevented her from saying something crazy. Maybe she's worried that she's not going to have enough food to feed the unexpected guests, and she just wants Mary to go and to buy some extra food while she stays at home and continues to keep things under control. And so, in light of that, Martha goes to Jesus and she demands that he tell Mary to help her do the work. Now, initially when you read that, it kind of sounds like Martha's a tattletale. Like, why couldn't she go to Mary herself? She's got to go to Jesus, as if Jesus was the parent and Jesus, Mary's not doing any of the work. Tell her to help me. You guys have siblings who were like that at all? I don't actually know if I did. It makes me kind of thankful. I probably was the tattletale, actually. But a kid wouldn't be worried about meeting people's expectations, or whether or not a guest would be insulted. Like, those are things that only adults worry about. So I think it's clear that Martha is not trying to be a tattletale, because her concerns and the expectations she's trying to meet are only things that an adult would be able to understand and realize. And so I think she's going with this genuine heart of wanting to, do what's expected and not disappoint people. But the word for worried is similar to the word that Martha uses to ask Jesus if he cares. So when Martha asks Jesus, don't you care? Jesus says, yeah, I care, but you care, you're worried too much. See, it takes the idea of caring about something and it exaggerates it. So Martha is overly concerned or cares too much to the point that she's distracted. I don't know if you guys remember your first crush. Okay? Picture that person. Well, maybe don't picture that person. You know you had one, right? So if you remember your first crush, if someone were to ask you, hey, do you care about that person? I mean, the obvious answer would be yes, right? Like, of course you care about the person. Like, the same way you care about your friends, or the same way you care about your siblings, or the same way you care about your parents, you know? Like, you care about them. But if someone were to ask you, do you have a crush on them, what would your response be? Oh, no, I don't have a crush. No, I don't like her. She annoys me, you know? We're talking like when you're, maybe 8 or 6 years old, right? And I think that's because we understand, even at an early age, that we can care so much about something or someone that it becomes a distraction. Like, to care about someone is different than having a crush on someone, like being overly concerned with how they perceive you, or what they think of you, or what other people think about you. So Martha goes to Jesus to show him how much she cares about working hard, about pleasing people, about showing hospitality. And Jesus looks at her and he says, Martha, Martha, you care too much. You were worried and upset. When Jesus tells the parable of the sower in Luke 8, verse 14, he says, the seed that fell among thorns stands for those who hear. So there's a sower who casts seed on 4 different soils, and the seed that fell among the thorns, it stands for those who hear, so they hear it, but as they go on their way, the word is choked out by life's worries, its riches, and its pleasures, and the seed does not mature. It doesn't bear fruit. It doesn't grow. So we may be receiving the seed of God's word every week. Like on Sunday morning, you may be reading God's word every single day on your own. But if we care too much about the wrong things, those things will choke out the things that we do. So what are you concerned with? Like, what are you giving your attention to? What worries you? What do you care too much about? If you find yourself struggling to grow, it may not be because you're doing the wrong things or that you're not doing the right things. Like, you may be doing all the right things, like the good Christian things. But if you feel like you're struggling to grow, it may be because you are doing the wrong things to the point where they choke out the good. Does that make sense? So it's not that you're not doing the right things, but if you do the wrong things while doing the right things, then the wrong things will choke out the right things you're doing. Now, one of the right things that you guys have done was last week when we studied the parable of the Good Samaritan and we had that challenge to help that family in need. And I want to brag on you for a second because I asked you to do one of 3 things, and I'm trusting that you all were praying as I was this past week for the family. I'm trusting that you've been keeping your ear to the ground about whether or not there's a place that they can move to, a place that they can rent. And I know that you gave generously because our church raised $1,700 last week to help the family, which covers like 2 months' rent. And we went last week, a few of us went last week to the house, met them, talked to them, and we gave them May's rent, so that catches them up to speed. And then we gave them a couple $100 in gas gift cards to the BP, hoping that they'll come to Nashville and come to church and get gas while they're here. And then a Kroger gift card as well for them to get groceries at the Kroger in Bloomington. And they were very thankful, like sincerely thankful. And they said multiple times, tell the church, thank you, thank you, thank you for helping them. So from me to you and from them to you, thank you for coming alongside that family and loving them as Jesus would love them. Jesus does care about what we do, and Jesus cares about that. He sees your generosity and your willingness to sacrifice. I mean, that's what like sharing the cross looks like. But while we do the good, we need to make sure that we don't care so much about what people think or about expectations or sort of in this air of self-righteousness that it chokes out the good that we do. So does he care about us? Yes. Does he care about what we do? Yes. Third question, does he care about how we feel? We see this in verse 42. So Jesus had just said, Martha, Martha, you are worried about and upset about many things. Martha, you care too much, but only one thing is needed. Mary has chosen what is better. So again, contrasting Martha to Mary, Mary has chosen what is better, and it will not be taken away from her. See, Jesus contrasts Martha and Mary, but he doesn't only contrast what they do. So it's not just that Mary is sitting at Jesus' feet and Martha is busy making all these preparations. He also contrasts how they feel, because that's important. Mary is sitting joyfully, willingly at the feet of Jesus, whereas Martha is worried and upset frantically in a panic about all the things that are going on around her. And Jesus isn't saying that we shouldn't work or we shouldn't have things to do, because he calls us to work, and like going and making disciples implies that we're making disciples in our daily jobs, and the people that we meet, when we go to the grocery store, when we come to church, all those things. So he's not saying that work is bad or having things to do is bad, but he is saying that if those things cause us to worry, then they're not worth doing, because he cares about how we feel. Like, there are going to be times when we just need to grit our teeth and do what we don't want to do. And that may be working on a hot summer day to do some landscaping for a widow. That may be getting up early to talk with God, or asking our spouse for forgiveness. Like, things that we may not want to do, we need to just do it. But ideally, doing the right thing, doing those things should bring us joy. Like, it should bring us joy. Pleasing God should please us. Pleasing God should please us. It should bring us joy. So about a month ago, on Kayla and I's 1-year anniversary, I got up early in the morning on a Sunday when I was going to be preaching, and I drove to get Kayla some Dunkin' Donuts coffee and a bouquet of flowers. And I was hoping to get back before she woke up, but of course she was already awake. And she realized I was gone. And so the surprise was ruined, but my heart was so full of joy, and I had this big smile on my face, because pleasing her pleased me. And that's the same kind of relationship that we should have with God. Pleasing God should be pleasing to us. And if we don't have joy when we are doing what is right, then we need to pause to ask ourselves, why are we doing what we're doing? Because it's not just what we do that Jesus cares about, but it's how we feel when we do it. And he wants us to have joy. It should be pleasing to us to please him. I think that we will naturally find more joy when we focus on doing less. So more specifically, when we focus on controlling less, we will enjoy life more. I tend to err towards wanting to control than wanting to just kind of let things happen. So part of wanting to control means that I want to help people and be involved in people's lives. But the negative side of that is that you can become over-controlling, right? Or over-demanding. Can anyone relate a little bit? And what Jesus is telling Martha, who would probably be more in that category with me, is don't worry about controlling what your sister's doing and controlling all these expectations of people around you, but enjoy the relationship you have with me. Enjoy the relationship that you have with Mary. Enjoy the relationship you have with Lazarus and with your friends in Bethany. I've noticed that people in Brown County live at a slower pace of life. That's so funny. I did the same thing in the first service. People laughed. It's obvious. So you guys know that, obviously. You live at a slower pace of life, which is great, because that allows you to enjoy every day. And when you come to church, I know you're coming not just because you've got this checklist of things you got to do during the week, but you come because it brings you joy, whether that's because of the people that you have, share life with, or because it's the encouragement that you receive when you sing and when you study God's word. You come because it brings you joy. And that is the way that it should be. Going to church should never be a chore, and the church isn't a business, it's a family. So I don't think it's a coincidence that the word business and busyness have one letter difference. And when we reduce church to just a business that we donate to and we are like a member of, like we would be the member of a country club, that church becomes just another busy thing to do in our lives. Jesus said in Matthew chapter 11, verses 28 through 30, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." See, Jesus is not telling Martha, and he's not telling us that we don't need to care about what we do, because what we do is important. It is important to work hard, and Jesus isn't saying, come to me and you're never going to have to work another day in your life. But he is saying that when you work, if you do come to me, that you will find purpose and meaning and joy in the work that you do. Like, you won't be just doing it for yourself, but you will be doing it for God. Like, he gives you the strength every day to get up. He gives you breath in your lungs to breathe in the fresh morning air and then to go out and to do the work with a joyful heart, never knowing who you may encounter when you're heading for Jerusalem and he says, hey, go around this way in order to have a life-changing encounter with someone. And it may not be life-changing. It could just be a simple encouragement. You could say something encouraging to someone in your day-to-day interactions in the stores or at work or whatever that is going to cause that person to say, I wonder why they have so much joy. Joy is contagious, isn't it? Like, it is a contagious thing. And so Jesus isn't telling us that all we need is just to sit and to listen to him. Like, all you need is to study God's word and you're good. He's not reducing being a disciple or following him to simply that. He ultimately is calling us to walk with him, which means to sit at his feet and listen to him, which means to be the one who's serving and showing hospitality to guests. I mean, that's really what it means to be a disciple, is to walk with the teacher, to be around the teacher as much as you possibly can. Like, if you want to be like someone, be around them, which is why they always say, you end up like your parents, whether or not you like it or not. It's because you're around them all the time. That's why. They may not even be the person you look up to the most, but you are around them and you naturally take on the mannerisms and the thoughts and the values of the people that you're around. So as we walk with Jesus, as we are around Jesus, as we sit at his feet, as we serve alongside him, like we're sharing his mission, we can be assured that he is bearing the burden with us and that burden is never going to become more than we can bear. It may wear us down at times, but there is joy, there is fulfillment, there is satisfaction that we feel in sharing his mission. So, in order to share his burden, we must let him share ours first. In order to share the cross that he bore, we have to let him bear our cross. And that means we must repent, and that means we must trust. And so the question as we close is, have you repented and have you trusted? Because Jesus cares for you. He cares about what you do. He cares about how you feel. And like, he wants you to find joy and he wants you to find satisfaction in this life. I mean, just yesterday, and this may turn into something later, but I said, I love life. Like, life is so good. And it just brings a smile to my face when I think about all the things I've done, all the things I want to do, all the people I know, all the people I've met, and I hope that is true of you. And that only is because of the relationship that I have with Jesus. So have you repented and have you trusted in him? Because he cares for you. He will care for you. And so if you have questions about what it means to be a disciple, to sit at the feet of Jesus, or if you have questions about this church, as we stand and as we sing, you can come forward. I'll be right up front and you can talk with me.